Earlier today, I had the good fortune of having a video interview with Dr. Mark Bauerlein of the English department at Emory University. Our conversation was wide-ranging, so what I did was I produced two separate videos that recorded the conversation. The first part, which I have linked in this video, is about his work as a consultant on the Common Core state standards, which are now governing a lot of K-12 education in the U.S. This part of the video focuses more on his work and his views regarding the proper education of the young, and particularly one book that he wrote in 2008 called The Dumbest Generation: How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, and a book that he recently co-edited called The State of the American Mind: 16 Leading Critics on the New Anti-Intellectualism. So this is the second part of the video. If you watched part one, you'll notice a little bit of repetition in some of the questions and answers. I had to include certain answers in both videos just to give a little bit of background so that the videos and other answers made sense in light of what he had previously said. It sort of brings us to some of the content of your 2008 book, The Dumbest Generation. Because when I read it, I mean, of course, despite the provocative title, it's not that you're saying that these kids are incapable of skills. It seems like what you're saying is that the skills they're getting are not necessarily the skills that are going to be conducive to good thinking, let's say. So, blogs and the fact that they can do, visual media and things like that is one thing. But it sounds like what you're saying largely in the book is, but that is very different than the skills that would be required to read a longer argument and consider that argument and evaluate the argument, or the vocabulary skills that a book can give you that maybe a blog post can't.
Right. There are two threads here. One is that the practices of the digital age for teenagers do not develop forms of advanced literacy and the kinds of cultural literacy, the knowledge backgrounds that are going to serve them well when they go to college and when they go out into the workplace. They will instead write text messages, tweets on Twitter, and emails, although email isn't very popular with them anymore, or the posts, the little blog comments, things like this, make it so that they are writing more words than ever before in human history. But unfortunately, writing in one genre, let's say the text message, might make you a very good text messenger. Those writing skills that go with that genre are not transferable to writing a college research paper. Writing doesn't work that way. You can do something very good where you groove habits very well. And that can actually hinder you from writing a 5-page summary analysis of a poem. If you are online, you move quickly. You jump from screen to screen. You like a lot of visuals. What is going to happen to you if I assign to you an Emily Dickinson poem? You've got to go slowly through that poem. It is dense, metaphorical. Sometimes I am not sure what Emily Dickinson is talking about. If your mind from age 12, 13 is primed for the accelerated process, you don't want to slow down. It's actually going to irritate you when you read an Emily Dickinson poem not to get it at first glance. So we are losing, I think, generally speaking, these are all generalizations, we are losing the capacity for slow reading, slow writing, slow thinking, and those are necessary attributes in a complicated world. And I see it in the college classes that I teach. There's an impatience, a discomfort with the silent, thoughtful moment when we read a line from T.S. Eliot and say, stop and think about that for a moment. And they're in a rush. Kevin, their lives are so hectic. When I ask the students something about, why don't you do this? Well, I'm so busy. My goodness, these kids are so busy. And you know what? They genuinely do feel busy. And one of the biggest burdens on their day is managing their social network. They average, a couple of years ago, was the last survey I saw, Nielsen found they average 120, 130 text messages every day.
Yeah, I was actually talking with students about that. We were, it came up in one of our classes. We were talking about technology in the classroom. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And someone brought up the number of 120, 130, alluding to, I think, the study that you had seen. And a few of the students said, no, that's not right. I was like, is that too high? They're like, no, that's too low.
It's probably too low.
We're going more than that. And I guess for them, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of John McWhorter, the linguist. He's done some work on texting. And he's suggesting that texting is actually more like speech than it is like writing. So when we think of it as writing, we are overlooking the idea that this is basically becoming speech. So the same way students would speak with each other oftentimes, now they're texting. But
that makes a certain kind of sense to me.
But to your point, it becomes really saturated because I can only speak with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people at a time, where I could text and have text conversations with 20 people, and they, alternating between.
And they do in Facebook now.
So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, some more of the content of your books, which obviously govern the concerns that you brought to the table with the Common Core state standards. Here's a quote towards the end of, actually, I think it was in one of the first few chapters of your book that I found really interesting and maybe I think summarizes one of your points really well. It's a fairly long quote. When we look at the front end of digital usage, at the materials and transactions available online, we discover a mega world of great books, beautiful artworks, historical information, statistical data, intelligent magazines, et cetera, et cetera. But when we get to the back end of digital usage, to the minds of those who spent their formative years online, we draw a contrary conclusion. Whatever their other virtues, these minds know far too little, and they read and write and calculate and reflect way too poorly. So you wrote this book in 2008. So as of this recording, it was about 8 years ago. Have you seen the same trends? Have the trends accelerated? Have the trends lessened?
Everything's worse. It's all worse, Kevin. Look, when you see, there was no Instagram back then. Twitter had just started. Snapchat didn't exist. Yik Yak, I don't know when Yik Yak started. Facebook actually was just really starting to roll. Facebook was started in 2005, didn't really blow up until 2006.
Right, it was a transition of MySpace to Facebook was, I think, 2007, right. 2008, yeah.
And let me speak personally. What I see in my direct contact with students is the loss of a particular kind of student. When I came out of graduate school in 1989, in English classes, you would find the bookish, offbeat kid. Didn't care so much about grades, wasn't thinking about a professional future, but had an active literary mind. Read, loved reading, read everything. And if I mentioned something in class that wasn't on the syllabus, this kid would probably go get it out of the library and read it too. Bookishness, right? That student's gone. A rarity at this point. And in that student's place is the achiever who comes into the humanities, the English classroom, thinking less about exploring ideas, one who has less been captivated by Dostoevsky or by Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights or Jane Austen, and just wants more of that. Instead, it's the achievement mentality where education is as an instrument for something else in class, and then out of class, it is the social media craze. This is not a kid who goes up to the library, finds a chair, and reads. Exploration now is through Facebook. It's keeping up with friends. It is so education has become a getting ahead process. And out of class life has become a social management process. And I constantly say to students in class, you have to do things like go talk to your professors. You've got to go into their office and talk to them every single week. Why? For practice. So you learn to communicate eye to eye. Look me in the eye. You communicate with someone 25 years older than you are. You've got to learn to do this. You're going to be interviewing with people who are like me. You're going to have coworkers like me. What are you going to say to them? You've got to develop the art of conversation. You have to learn to talk about ideas that have nothing to do with your social life.
So it seems like the argument is less that you don't want necessarily the modern world to stop. Let's revert back. Let's stuff it all in the box, right? That's going to be the caricature probably argument. It's more that I think in what you're saying with the book is that you say is whatever the virtues that these students have. So you're saying there are some virtues here, but it needs to be balanced out with, okay, so you can consume media at a very rapid rate. That's a good thing in some ways. But in other ways, it's also good to be able to have the skills to back up and analyze and evaluate and sit with a book for 60 minutes plus and read. So it's almost a balancing act. We want to have these skills over here, but we also want to balance them out.
We want the capacity to focus, to summarize in very clear, direct language. These are the things that are going to help them when they're older.
Right.
And these are smart kids. They're just as smart. Some of them are these super smart kids and super motivated kids. They build up these incredible records. But I see among even the top students the excess social interaction.
Getting back to your books, the most recent book that you've published, the co-edited volume, The State of the American Mind,
right.
You have an article in there called The Troubling Trend of Cultural IQ. And I was going to ask you, because it looks like the article really kind of revolves around making sure that arguing that everyone should have certain basis of civic and historical knowledge, kind of a shared knowledge.
Right.
I was going to ask you what is your argument there in terms of why is it important that we all have this shared knowledge? And I'm going to ask it with the preface that, of course, that certain critics would say something like, well, it's not really that important because the age of knowing is over. We can offload a lot of our knowledge onto these devices. Right. So we don't really need to know these things. We can kind of look them up as we go along. So right. I'm sure you have opinions on that. So I'm going to ask so what is your argument for cultural IQ?
It usually doesn't take long for people to say when I'm giving a talk, why is it so important? We can always look it up, right? It's always there. We have all the knowledge that we want. And what I would say in response is the Gettysburg Address is now really something that has the status of a foundational document, a founding document. Why memorize the Gettysburg Address? Why know those sentences? You can always look it up. It's always right there. And what I would say is in saying that we don't need to internalize the Gettysburg Address, we are turning it into just a piece of information that we retrieve when we need it. The Gettysburg Address itself is not an expression of a civic religion that we should possess. I mean, it should be in us. You know, those lines which resound in American history and civics shouldn't become part of you. You're an American citizen. What are the things that you should have inside you that make you an American citizen? How about we hold these truths? How about some of those lines in the Declaration of Independence? How about we the people of the United States? Should you know those things? How about 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent? You have to acquire these things. It's not just information. It's part of your formation as an American citizen.
The caricature of that position would be something like, oh, he just wants us to stuff our heads full of facts. So cultural IQ is, you know, this fact, and you know this fact, and you know this fact. It sounds like what you're saying is much more complicated than you're saying. We need to internalize these things. It's not we need to know them as facts. We need to know the ideas. So I guess maybe an example I would use is someone could tell you all of the clauses of the First Amendment of the Constitution, but you're saying it's not that they should be able to tell you the clauses. It's that they should be able to tell you the rationale for,
right,
tell you the ideas behind. So you're really saying you want the cultural IQ in some ways to cultivate a certain type of thought in somebody, that if they know these things, they'll be better able to evaluate things.
Right. Look, the daily world, daily life, it's so chaotic. And Kevin, you watch the news and you will go from a horrible murder, and in 30 seconds, it's some cuddly human interest story about, you know, cats and you think, wait a minute, I have just seen an abomination, and now I'm supposed to smile and be happy. This is the modern world. This is the way things are now. You know, the kids, they get a text message from a friend. It's all, I love you, you're the greatest. The next text message says, you rotten blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's the world that they live in. Where are they going to find their stability? Knowledge of great works, great thoughts, great ideas, beautiful images, they can give them solidity, grounding. I mean, ultimately, religious faith is a reprieve, right? It's solace, it's firmness in a life of a rushing torrent of overstimulating images and sounds and words. And the words of Abraham Lincoln, with malice toward none, that phrase right there, that can ring inside you. That can tell you, I am not going to respond to malice with malice. I'm not going to do that. These are things that you hope. This is how, it's not just facts. They're values. It's moral instruction that comes from these things. I'm not against popular culture, contemporary materials, but one, with children, you really have to filter out a lot in today's mass culture. I want my son to be exposed to things that have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years for good reason. And every kid should get the best that Americans and humanity in general has come up with.
I think that's actually a really good spot to end it. I really appreciate this interview. It's very wide ranging. So we've gone over
Was?
several different areas that are really, really fascinating. Your participation in Common Core, kind of your stances on the best educational approaches and things. So I thank you, Dr. Bauerlein, for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Thank you, sir.